In rural Pennsylvania, during the summer of 1952, a 13-year-old boy walked into his family's kitchen and made a choice. A choice that would echo through generations. His name was Daniel Blackwood. And what he did that July morning didn't just destroy his family. It created a curse that still haunts his bloodline today. The witnesses were silenced, the records sealed, the truth buried so deep that even the FBI classified the files. But tonight, for the first time in 70 years, someone is finally going to tell you what really happened in that kitchen. What you're about to hear will change how you look at family secrets forever. Because some truths are so dark, so twisted, that they're not meant to be spoken. Until now. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. From the outside, the Blackwood family seemed perfect. The largest grain mill in Chester County, Pennsylvania, was owned by Robert Blackwood. At the Methodist Church, his wife, Catherine, taught Sunday school. The picture of American prosperity in post-war America was their 4 children, Daniel, Emily, little Michael, and baby Grace. Neighbors would later describe them as the kind of family everyone aspired to be: clean, respectable, God-fearing. But inside that pristine white farmhouse on Maple Ridge Road, something was rotting. Something that had been festering for generations, passed down through the Blackwood bloodline like a genetic defect. Robert's father had it, and his grandfather, too. A darkness that manifested not as violence or obvious cruelty, but as something far more insidious. A need to control, to possess, to own every dream, every thought, every breath of those closest to them. Daniel was different from his siblings. While Emily and Michael played outside, he watched. He studied the way his father's jaw would tighten when Catherine spoke too loudly at dinner, how Robert's eyes would narrow when the children laughed too hard. Things a 13-year-old shouldn't notice were what Daniel noticed. The way his mother's hands shook when she set his father's coffee down, the bruises on her wrists that she covered with long sleeves even in summer. But it wasn't just his mother. Slowly, methodically, Robert had a way of breaking people. A joke that cut too deep, a favor that came with invisible strings, a kindness that always demanded payment. The mill workers whispered about it, though never loud enough for Robert to hear, how men who crossed him would find their credit denied at the bank. Their children passed over for jobs, their families slowly strangled by an invisible hand. Daniel absorbed it all, every manipulation, every psychological trap, every subtle form of cruelty. And so, somewhere in that boy's developing mind, a terrible understanding took root. The Blackwood curse wasn't just about power. It was about poison. The kind that seeped into everything it touched. The first sign that Daniel was different came on a cold February morning in 1951. His younger brother, Michael, had broken one of Robert's prized hunting rifles, an accident that would normally result in a beating so severe the boy wouldn't sit for weeks. But Daniel intervened in a way that chilled everyone who witnessed it. He didn't defend Michael. He didn't take the blame. Instead, 13-year-old Daniel walked calmly to his father and whispered something in his ear. Something that made Robert's face go white. The beating never came. Michael was sent to his room, confused and grateful. But Catherine knew. She saw the look in her eldest son's eyes, the same cold calculation she recognized in her husband, but worse, more refined, more patient. What Daniel had whispered was simple: "I know about the Miller woman." Dorothy Miller was Robert's secretary at the grain mill, a widow with 2 young children. The affair had been going on for months, hidden from the town, from the church, from everyone except one observant boy who made it his business to know things. That was Daniel's first taste of real power, not the crude dominance his father wielded with fists and threats, but something far more elegant: information, secrets, the ability to control people not through fear of immediate pain, but through the terror of exposure, of losing everything they'd built, everything they pretended to be. From that day forward, like other boys collected baseball cards, Daniel began collecting secrets. He learned that Mrs. Henderson, the church organist, had been skimming from the collection plate, that Deputy Sheriff Williams was selling confiscated liquor from his basement, that Dr. Morton had been prescribing morphine to himself for years. Each secret was carefully catalogued, stored away for the right moment, the right leverage. But the most important secret Daniel discovered was about his own family, about why Robert's brother had left town so suddenly in 1943, about what had happened to Robert's first wife, the one who'd supposedly died in a car accident before he married Catherine, about the real reason the Blackwood family had so much money despite owning just a small grain mill. The truth was buried in old newspapers, whispered in bars, hinted at in property records. For over a century, the Blackwood men had been poisoning their own bloodline, not with actual toxins, but with something far more deadly. They infected everyone they touched with their darkness, turning love into ownership, trust into manipulation, family into a prison where escape meant destruction. By the spring of 1952, Daniel had become something that shouldn't exist in nature, a predator who understood he was a predator. Most children who grow up in toxic homes either break under the pressure or learn to survive by becoming invisible. Daniel chose a third path. He decided to perfect the poison. His younger siblings became his first laboratory. Emily, sweet 14-year-old Emily, had fallen in love with Stephen Hayes, the blacksmith's son, a good boy from a decent family. Robert disapproved, but hadn't yet forbidden the relationship. Daniel saw an opportunity to test his developing skills. He began slowly, a casual mention to Emily that he'd seen Stephen talking to Rebecca Walsh after church. A suggestion that maybe Stephen's attention was wandering. When Emily dismissed it, Daniel escalated. He started leaving notes in Emily's schoolbooks, supposedly from concerned friends, warning her about Stephen's wandering eye. Anonymous letters appeared under her pillow, describing in vivid detail Stephen's supposed encounters with other girls. But the master stroke came when Daniel convinced Michael, still grateful for his brother's earlier protection, to tell Emily that he'd seen Stephen kissing another girl behind the general store. It was a lie, but Michael delivered it with the wide-eyed honesty only a 10-year-old could manage. Emily's relationship with Stephen ended in a storm of tears and accusations. Stephen, bewildered and hurt, left for Philadelphia to work in his uncle's factory. He never returned to Chester County. Emily retreated into herself, convinced that love was just another form of betrayal. Daniel watched it all with the detached fascination of a scientist studying a successful experiment. But Emily's destruction was just practice. The real target of Daniel's growing expertise was his father. For decades, Robert Blackwood had ruled through crude intimidation, never realizing that his eldest son was studying every technique, cataloging every weakness, preparing to become something far more dangerous. The opportunity came in late June when Daniel discovered that Robert's affair with Dorothy Miller had produced consequences. She was pregnant. Robert was desperate to keep it quiet, to maintain his reputation in the community. But Daniel had already planted seeds throughout the town, casual comments to the right people, questions that seemed innocent but pointed suspicious minds in the right direction. By the time Robert realized what was happening, it was too late. The whole town knew. The church elders were asking uncomfortable questions. Catherine had started sleeping in the guest room. And through it all, Daniel remained the perfect concerned son, publicly supporting his father while privately orchestrating his downfall. July 15, 1952. The morning that would define the Blackwood legacy forever. Robert had spent the previous night drinking alone in his study, staring at the letter from the bank. His loans were being called in. Clients were cancelling contracts. The mill that had supported the Blackwood family for 3 generations was failing. Everything was collapsing, and he knew exactly who was responsible. His 13-year-old son had somehow engineered his complete destruction with the patience and precision of a master chess player. Catherine was in the kitchen making breakfast when Robert stumbled downstairs, still drunk from the night before. Emily had already left for her job at the library, one of the few places in town where she could hide from the whispers about her family. Michael and baby Grace were playing in the living room, unaware that their world was about to shatter forever. Daniel was calmly eating his oatmeal when Robert burst into the kitchen, his face purple with rage and alcohol. "You little bastard," he snarled. "You think you're so smart. You think you've won." Catherine tried to intervene, placing herself between her husband and son, but Robert shoved her aside so violently she struck her head against the kitchen counter. Blood began flowing from a gash above her ear. Daniel watched his mother fall, and for the first time in months, something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been genuine emotion. Robert grabbed Daniel by the throat, lifting the boy from his chair. "You destroyed everything," he whispered, his breath reeking of whiskey and rage. "But you made one mistake. You forgot that I'm still your father. And fathers have rights over their children that no amount of cleverness can change." What happened next was witnessed only by Catherine, bleeding and barely conscious on the kitchen floor. Robert reached for the carving knife, the one Catherine used for Sunday roasts. His intention was clear. If Daniel wanted to poison the family bloodline, Robert would end it right there. No more generations of Blackwood men. No more curse, just silence. But Daniel was faster. 13 years old, but already understanding survival in ways most adults never would. As Robert lunged with the knife, Daniel grabbed the cast-iron skillet from the stove, the one Catherine had been using to make eggs. The sound it made when it connected with Robert's skull was like a church bell ringing underwater, hollow, final, permanent. Robert Blackwood collapsed onto the kitchen floor, blood pooling beneath his head, mixing with his wife's, and Daniel stood over both his parents, the skillet still in his hands, finally understanding the true nature of the poison that ran through his veins. It wasn't just psychological manipulation. It was the willingness to do whatever was necessary to survive, to win, to own. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? The official story was self-defense. A 13-year-old boy protecting his mother from a drunken, violent father. The town rallied around the Blackwood children, organizing fundraisers, providing meals, offering comfort to what they saw as innocent victims of a family tragedy. Sheriff Williams, the same man whose liquor-selling Daniel knew about, made sure the investigation was quick and clean. Case closed. Justice served. But Catherine knew better. As she recovered from her head injury in the hospital, she began to piece together the true sequence of events, how Daniel had systematically destroyed Robert's reputation, how he'd manipulated the entire town into turning against his father, how he'd created the exact circumstances that would lead to that violent confrontation in the kitchen. Her 13-year-old son hadn't just killed his father. He'd orchestrated it with the precision of a general planning a campaign. When she confronted Daniel in the hospital corridor, he didn't deny it. He simply looked at her with those cold, patient eyes and said, "He would have killed all of us eventually. I just made it happen faster and on my terms." Catherine realized then that she wasn't just looking at her son. She was staring into the face of something that had been growing inside the Blackwood bloodline for generations. Something that had finally found its perfect vessel. The foster care system separated the children. Emily went to live with Catherine's sister in Ohio, taking baby Grace with her. Michael was placed with a family in Pittsburgh. Daniel, as the oldest and the hero who'd saved his family, was sent to live with Robert's wealthy brother, Charles, in Baltimore, a man who'd left Chester County years earlier for reasons no one discussed. But the separation didn't stop the poison from spreading. Within a year of Robert's death, every family that had taken in a Blackwood child began experiencing problems. Emily's aunt and uncle, previously happy for 30 years, divorced bitterly after the uncle was caught embezzling from his own business. Money that somehow ended up in accounts Emily had access to. Michael's foster parents lost their home when their insurance mysteriously lapsed just before a suspicious kitchen fire. Even baby Grace's presence seemed to bring misfortune to everyone around her. Daniel, meanwhile, thrived in Baltimore. Uncle Charles owned a successful shipping company, and the boy quickly made himself indispensable. By age 15, he was managing correspondence. By 16, he was sitting in on business meetings. By 17, he'd learned that Uncle Charles had faked his own death in 1943 to escape fraud charges and had been living under an assumed identity ever since. Instead of exposing his uncle, Daniel proposed a partnership. The two Blackwood men understood each other perfectly. They were both predators, both survivors, both willing to poison everything around them to maintain their power. Together, they began building something that would make Robert's small-town tyranny look like child's play. By 1960, Daniel Blackwood had become something the world had never seen before, a psychological predator with unlimited resources and institutional power. The shipping company was just the beginning. Through careful manipulation and strategic destruction of competitors, The Blackwood empire expanded into banking, real estate, and political influence that reached from Baltimore to Washington, D.C. But Daniel's true innovation wasn't in business. It was in breeding. He understood that the Blackwood curse, this ability to poison and control, was genetic, something that could be cultivated, refined, and passed down to create a dynasty of human predators. His children wouldn't be accidents of nature like he'd been. They would be carefully crafted weapons. He married Helen Morrison, daughter of a prominent Baltimore judge, in 1963. The wedding was covered by all the major newspapers, celebrated as the union of two powerful families. What they didn't report was how Daniel had spent 3 years systematically destroying every other suitor Helen might have chosen. How he'd manipulated her father's political career to create dependency, how he'd slowly isolated her from every friend and family member until he was the only source of love and validation in her life. Helen bore him 4 children: James, born in 1964, Nathan in 1966, Victoria in 1968, and Alexander in 1970. Each child was raised not with love, but with purpose. With the obsession of a scientist perfecting a formula, Daniel studied child psychology, behavioral modification, and genetic theory. His children weren't just his offspring. They were his legacy, his weapons, his gift to the world. The results were terrifying. By age 10, James could manipulate his teachers into giving him perfect grades while simultaneously destroying the academic careers of classmates he saw as threats. Nathan developed an intuitive understanding of financial systems that allowed him to bankrupt competitors through seemingly legal transactions. Victoria learned to read people's psychological weaknesses with surgical precision, turning their own insecurities into weapons against them. But it was Alexander, the youngest, who truly perfected his father's methods. While his siblings were obvious predators, brilliant and dangerous, but detectable, Alexander learned to hide his nature completely. He became the perfect psychopath, capable of inspiring genuine love and trust while slowly poisoning everyone around him. The family's influence spread like a cancer through American society. Blackwood children married into political families, took positions in major corporations, infiltrated law enforcement and judicial systems. Each generation became more sophisticated, more hidden, more effective at spreading their psychological poison. They didn't just destroy individuals anymore. They corrupted entire institutions, entire communities, entire ways of thinking. Catherine, now in her 60s and living alone in a small apartment in Harrisburg, watched it all from a distance. She'd spent decades trying to warn people, writing letters to newspapers, contacting authorities, pleading with anyone who would listen. But who would believe that a family of respected businessmen and community leaders were actually evolutionary predators systematically poisoning American society from within? The truth about the Blackwood bloodline remains buried today, 70 years after that morning in the kitchen. Daniel died in 1995, officially of a heart attack, though several business rivals who'd crossed him in his final years met mysterious ends in the months following his funeral. Vast networks of influence across America are now controlled by his children: corporations, political parties, media outlets, educational institutions. They've perfected the art their father pioneered, the ability to poison from within, to corrupt without detection, to destroy while appearing to heal. Alexander Blackwood serves on the board of 3 major charities while systematically embezzling funds to finance political campaigns that serve his family's interests. Victoria runs a prestigious psychology practice in Manhattan, using her patients' secrets to blackmail their spouses, their employers, their children. James never entered politics directly. He didn't need to. His foundation provides funding to dozens of political candidates, always with strings attached, always creating dependencies that can be exploited. Nathan's investment firm has quietly acquired controlling interests in local newspapers across 12 states, ensuring that certain stories never get reported, certain investigations never begin. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Blackwood legacy is how completely they've succeeded in hiding their nature. They attend charity galas and church services. They give interviews about family values and American dreams. Their children attend the finest schools, marry into the best families, perpetuate the cycle of respectability that masks the poison flowing through their veins. The descendants of that 13-year-old boy who killed his father now number in the dozens. Some carry the full genetic load, the complete psychological profile that makes them apex predators in human skin. Others carry just pieces of the pattern, the charm without the cruelty, the intelligence without the manipulation, the survival instinct without the need to destroy. But all of them carry something. All of them pass something down. Catherine Blackwood died in 2003, taking her warnings to the grave. The files she'd accumulated over the decades, photographs, documents, testimony from victims, were found after her death by a grandnephew who recognized their significance. He tried to interest journalists, law enforcement, academic researchers. Every attempt was met with skepticism, legal challenges, or worse. 2 reporters who began investigating the family died in separate accidents within 6 months. The documents were eventually donated to a small historical society in Pennsylvania where they remain today. Catalogued, preserved, and completely ignored. Because the truth about the Blackwood bloodline is too big, too implausible, too threatening to the comfortable fiction that evil announces itself with horns and pitchforks. The boy who poisoned his bloodline succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. He didn't just destroy his own family. He created a blueprint for psychological predation that his descendants have perfected and spread throughout American society. They walk among us still. They smile at us from television screens and boardroom meetings and charity functions. And they continue to poison everything they touch. One relationship, one institution, one generation at a time. The curse of the Blackwood bloodline isn't just their story. It's our story now. Because poison, once released, doesn't stay contained. It spreads. It adapts. It survives. And it's still spreading.